need to be lowered too in order for us to maintain our market position. Now, this looks like it's just a random checklist, but in fact, it actually anchors from that same paradigm of capture, create, and deliver value. These are all mechanisms to capture value on the cost side. These are on creating value, and these are on deliver value. Right? Capture value. Right? That's the dollars you spend versus the dollars your suppliers get. Right? Can you figure out a way to pay less to your suppliers? That's what capture value means. Right? Create value. Can you figure out a way to do it differently that might be more expensive? So something like quality economies, right? You're not spending less. You're spending less money because you're figuring out a more efficient way to do it. You're not just spending less money and making your suppliers poor, right? And then delivering value, recognizing what is it that your customers want to buy. Same logic on the differentiation side, right? How do you deliver value? How do you create value? How do you capture value? Right? Deliver value. Identify what the buyer wants. Now this is tricky. Apple's masters at this.
They
created that
value.
Correct.
They tell you.
Correct. So they're actually telling you, here's what you want. Right? Most of us do not have that luxury, but if you can figure out what the customer wants and give it to them, you're more inclined to capture them as a customer. Now, usually, what happens is you have, in whatever market you're in, a diverse customer base. And if you can figure out, say, you know what, this customer base is diverse, some of them want this product more than others, who are the ones that want it in a way that's not well fulfilled by the market? There are people who want your what's it called, pest eggs, and there are people who don't care. Right? And there are people who don't care.
No, but that's not true. What if I get the price?
I'm merely saying there are some who want and some who don't. Right?
Why
For
wouldn't
me,
you want? No. This is it. This is something you're gonna want, because why wouldn't you want a healthier solution for a cheaper price? I'm offering both.
you're saying a healthier solution for a problem I didn't even know I had. That's why.
But
Right?
if you
Or
do have a
Which,
problem,
right.
Or
You
people
already
will
say,
have a hard time to believe it.
right? You're saying identify what the buyer values. And the amazing part about what the buyer values is it could be completely illogical. Right? I have friends of mine who are in the consulting business who work with clients who are inevitably, their personal client is mid-level within the organization. In other words, their clients are not the CEOs. Now the mid-level people all say to them, listen, we know you deliver great service, but you know what we really need from you? Can you help us with our budget? Now what do I mean by help us with our budget? We know you're going to do this work for us in January. If I don't spend my budget this year, I'm going to lose it. So can you bill me for the work you're going to do in a few months? Because that's what my buyer values. Right? So as a mid-tier consultancy, they become very successful because they've helped their clients with what they want. Now their client is not the whole organization, their client is just that buyer, that payer, what that buyer values. So once you figure what that buyer wants, then everything else can be modified. In healthcare, it's even more twisted because the buyer is not the same as the consumer. Right? And this is one of the things that people get very frustrated about healthcare. They say, well, I want this, but guess what? You're not paying for it. Right? It's the person who pays for it whose opinion matters. Is that let's ship that. Pensive or a pen? It's fine. So, that's how you deliver value, figure out what those buyers want, figure out a way to meet those needs, right? Again, there is a niche of people who are going to want your product. I guarantee you it's not everybody. And I know you think it's everybody.
it is
right?
everybody.
But it's not, right?
But
You think
I can tell you up front that I'm not buying the product. I mean, you have one less than everybody. Go around. I mean, what do you mean everybody? There's one person that wants.
Yes, you are. You work at a
There are
hospital.
buyers. There are buyers who do not care about the content of the product. They only care about the brand. And if they've never heard of
Okay.
you, they're not going to buy it.
Okay,
Period.
but unless I establish a brand.
Understood. But in terms of where you are right now, you have to deal with the buyer, look at your market, and it's made up of a bunch of segments, and if you try to sell to people who are not prepared to buy it from you, right, you're not going to win.
And by the way, this technology has been it's been 15
No doubt.
years.
No doubt.
But hold on, it also
And wait.
No, because
There's more.
it's been used in farms, and it extends the life of life of a cow by
Did you pay for this
40%.
exclusive
And
relationship?
huh?
How much did you pay for this exclusive relationship?
I want to hold on to that clip because the more you talk about this example, the more it actually reminds me very much of Cree and the light bulb business. So save the discussion for when we get to Cree.
Transition.
Right? But we're not there yet.
Wait, is that like
Segue.
a door-to-door sale?
Segue. I love
That's
Say again?
The light bulbs when you go door-to-door.
No. I'm talking about the role of the new technology and how it
Oh.
replaces a existing technology which is inferior, right? Which is inferior, and at the same time, the new technology, how does it get in there and how does it position itself? We'll get there when we get to Cree. All right, so how to differentiate. You figure out what the buyer wants, be your Apple computer or any other company that's figured out a way to say, there's a subset of buyers, some niche we can attack and get even though they're not being served very well by the current market. Determine how to meet those needs, but uniquely and sustainably, right? When I say sustainably, it's okay, if you do it and then everyone else does it the next year, so what, right? Sustainably may be by virtue of a patent, sustainably may be by virtue of forcing trade-offs by your competitors, right? But if you open up you say, you know what, there needs to be a meat restaurant in this neighborhood, right? And there isn't one, I'm gonna open one, right? But how am I gonna do it in a way that no one else is gonna be successful there? I've gotta, figure out what you're gonna do, right? Uniquely and sustainably. That's how you're doing great value. And then finally, capture value is, again, you have to charge premium for it, right? You've done all these activities to try to get yourself into a great business, but if you haven't figured out a way to get a great business for which the revenue is going to exceed the cost, you haven't really come up with much of a strategy. But remember, differentiation has to consider the buyer's willingness to pay, right? Look at this fantastic new product I have. It's better than all the other ones. And the buyer is saying, I don't care, here's my budget for this product, I'm spending it, have a nice day. But, you've got to convince. Say again?
But it's business.
Too bad. Too bad. I don't care. I'm spending X on it, and
That's
then I'm
X.
done. Right? Costs,
At least the name is good, you guys remember it.
and costs have to align with premium creation, right? Now, we're gonna go into this specifically with Husky, but this entire notion of a premium company, your costs are higher than everybody else's. Those costs have to be higher in a way that induces the premium. They can't just say, well, we're a premium company, so it's okay for us to throw away money on marketing, it's okay for us to have lavish dinners and spend money on whatever, because we're a premium company and that's our image. No, there has to be very specific value for that cost, which is why you get Philip Morris spending money on the symphony orchestra, right? Why did Philip Morris spend money on the symphony orchestra? What does that have to do with tobacco? Nothing. Why does that cost align with their activities? Why would Philip Morris?
Because it creates that element of like premium and
Right, creates the element of premium. It enables them to have perhaps greater access to politicians. Whatever the case may be, those costs are not spent in vain, or at least in theory. Right, so that's how to implement it, how to achieve it. Business model, okay? Here you are sitting, okay? I want to do a premium strategy. How are we going to do it? Number one, who is the buyer? Who's the buyer for Pest Egg? Pest Eggs? Who's going to buy this product? Right? Why are they going to buy it?
Everyone with the pest problem.
Hold on a second. Why do they buy your product?
Because it's better.
No. Why? What's their values?
They protecting their family.
Hold on a second. So now you're going to not put a price on that. But guess what? Everyone puts a price on stuff. Right? Why?
It's cheaper. It's still offered cheaper.
Aha. So here you are. The value chain from the buyer's perspective is, I need to spend less money on pest management, or I need to spend more money on pest management.
Doesn't
You
matter.
don't even know you have pets.
I didn't even know, right? You have to understand, what is it from the buyer's perspective? What does the buyer want? And how are you going to say, I want to make life easier by giving you this product?
In this particular example,
Uh-huh.
I can go ahead. Like, let me give you an example. My cost, I believe, is $2.
Okay?
Okay. If I go ahead and sell it.
Buyer's perspective. What's the buyer's
Okay, if I
cost?
go ahead and sell it for $10, I'll still make money. I can also sell it for $1,000 and you will still buy it. That's the difference, because there is no price ceiling in that industry. That industry is a $12 billion industry.
There may be no price ceiling on the industry. On the
So-
industry, there's a price ceiling for every individual buyer. Every buyer has a willingness to
Possibly,
pay.
except if you
No,
have
not
bed
possibly.
bugs all over
Every
your...
buyer has a willingness to pay. Every buyer has a willingness to pay. And how do you derive how much a buyer is willing to pay for a product? Part of it is figuring out how much they would pay for the alternative, right? And say, well, the alternative sucks.
And it's $500,
Right?
so I would pay
the alternative is $500. I'm going to charge them only $300. That's great, but you have to understand what the alternatives are and how much they pay for. Now, the alternatives may not be a fixed value. In other words, it's either definite 500, or the alternative could be a possible loss of tens of thousands of dollars at a probability of 1%. Right? It just makes the calculation a little bit more complicated, but the calculation still exists. That there's an amount that your customer values your product. And by the way, their calculation doesn't have to be rational. They just have to value. And by rational, there are people who just think that things are going to happen. Think back to the 3 little pigs, right? There are people who think it's just a matter of time before the wolf attacks me, right? And there are others who are going to say, you are wasting your time trying to sell me wolf insurance because it's not going to happen, right? So what am I going to do? Going to give it to you? I need peace of mind. I don't need peace of mind. I'm just going to, I'm going to build my house and go play in the woods. That's what pigs do, right? How can you uniquely help the buyer, right? So now you've understood what the buyer wants. How are you going to help the buyer? You can either lower the buyer's costs, right? So remember, just because you're a differentiation company doesn't mean your buyer's a differentiation company. Or you can enhance your buyer's performance, which is really another way of managing their costs. Okay? So here you are, let's say you're selling not to an end consumer, but to a pest management company, right? And they're showing up, and they now have to pay less for your materials, or they may be able to have better performance or whatever they do. But that's how you're going to uniquely help the buyer, as soon as you understand who your buyers are. And then finally, you calculate those costs of differentiation, and you charge a premium price. Right? So again, figure out how you're going to create value, how you're going to deliver value, and then once you figure that out, actually capture the value by adding on the dollar cost and saying, all right, now we figure out what you want, how I'm going to be able to deliver it better than everybody else, here's how much you have to pay for it, and by the way, I hope you're willing to pay for it, because if you're not, then it's not much of a business model. The last part I'm going to spend the least amount of time on this is focus, right? So we know about differentiation, right? Either at the industry-wide or the segment level. We know about cost leadership, either at the industry-wide or the segment level. If you're just focused, you are only at one segment, right? And so how do you go about entering this? Well, you have to start by selecting a target segment with unusual needs, right? So Husky is not going after every type of buyer. They're only going after very specific types of buyers. So what kinds of companies is Husky trying to sell to?
Companies that create plastic bottles.
Right?
Plastic.
But big ones, little ones,
Big
high-end ones, low-end ones with diverse products, ones with the same products. So for example, if you sell to a bottler, bottler's only making bottles, right? As opposed to if you're selling to a toy company, toy companies have like 500 different kinds of plastic shapes, right? And so changing the machine every time you want to make a shape this way versus that way is not a trivial process, right? So a machine that might be easier to change is what might be valued by one segment, as opposed to a machine that's very efficient for large volumes would be different for another segment. So you have to understand what are the needs of your segment that you're serving, right? And then you can either do cost differentiation or focus, but a cost or differentiation, but it's the focus itself that creates a differentiation advantage, either by virtue of being specialized or being accessible or having some other relationship that by being focused and only targeting this one market, we're going to do particularly well. Right? Think of kosher restaurants. Right? Kosher restaurants are only focusing on a particular segment of the population, period. Right? And so now, doing so, right, lets them do things like saying, well, we don't have to advertise like crazy because everyone's going to know who we are, because there's not very many of the everyone. Right? Now, there's going to be extra costs with us because we're only open 6 days a week instead of 7 days a week. Okay? So no one else could sustain that, but we can handle that because we're not doing the same kind of advertising that a mass market restaurant would have to do. And so on and so forth. Hope you don't mind that. Everyone, I'm picking on your relative industries to the extent that I can, right? And then finally, optimizing your activities for that segment, right? Once you figure out what you're going to do, right, to be a focused company, you're doing the things that just service that company in a way that says no one else is going to copy this, because if they try to, they're not going to be able to service that as well. And in many ways, you do trade off profitability with market share, and a focused strategy will prefer to be niched, right? We're happy with a small market share because we're only serving our individual segment. If we tried to serve everybody, we wouldn't be very good because we're so busy orienting our activities around servicing just individual companies, right? Which is why, how come kosher restaurants never succeed at serving the general population?
Bad service.
Right? It's bad service, but why do they have bad service? They don't have to have good service.
Except for some boys.
Well, you're going to the wrong.
Right, except for one restaurant I know it's great.
Go where you take.
Right. Not good though, totally. But yes, exactly
The
that.
truth is that statement is very
Misleading.
1990s.
Yeah, it's misleading. It's misleading. But in terms of a straw man, it works.
Certain
for me
people didn't went to restaurants.
to say this
until
thing.
1990.
Yes. Let's talk about a very classic focus differentiation challenge. Right, the specialty bookstores. Anybody recognize this? This is a scene from a movie.
Portlandia?
Say again?
No,
not
Notting
Portlandia.
Hill. Notting Hill.
No, not Notting Hill.
Is that Meg Ryan?
It is Meg Ryan.
Is it with Tom Hanks? Is it?
It is with Tom Hanks, and it is You've Got Mail. Excellent. So I was going to show a clip from You've Got Mail, but like, there's really no clip that really encapsulates the point I want to make. So just
So we can watch it in time. won't we?
right. You could watch. I tried that. It turned out it's like okay, fine. I watched the entire movie, and all right, I didn't get that.
I haven't seen it in a really.
Yeah, I hadn't either, and so I watched the whole movie. I couldn't find like the good scene that really kind of paid attention. But for anybody who can't recall or hasn't seen, somebody who has seen the movie and can recall what the basic plot was, love story aside, love story aside, what happens in the movie? I'll tell you.
I know they were in Cafe Lalo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yes, they were in Cafe Lalo, and yes, it's one of Nora Ephron's ultimate achievements as a screenwriter. But basically, the premise behind the movie, the romantic part at least, is that these are two pen pals who actually don't know each other. They don't know who they are. And over the course of the movie, he figures out who she is, and then she doesn't know who he is until the end of the movie. But and there's a few different versions of the story. There's a Broadway version called She Loves Me, and there's another old movie in the 1950s called Shop Around the Corner. Oh, the same plot over and over again.
I didn't know that.
Different plot. But the basic
Same
in
actor.
this plot, Meg Ryan is owner of a small children's bookstore called Shop Around the Corner on 68th and Columbus or something silly like that. And Tom Hanks' character is the vice president of basically a massive book company. I was going to say Borders for Barnes & Noble, but both of those are now currently kicking the can. So, but certainly in the 80s, those were big entities. So how does this like little shop around the corner children's bookstore survive juxtaposed next to Barnes & Noble, which is this massive behemoth of a bookstore, right? So how does this? So first of all, it's a focused differentiation challenge, right? How are you going to survive as a small business when the giant behemoth bookstore opens across the street?
Differentiate.
Differentiate. Good. So what are the activities that Meg Ryan's store is going to be able to do, right? And then what are the consequences of it? We can review the previous slide.
I mean, they can offer like one-on-one, like personalized service.
Exactly. So she had story time in the corner. And anybody who walked in, she got to know them individually, right? And we know our customers. That's how we're going to survive. That was one of the quotes Alan was trying to pull in, right? As opposed to, when you walk into Barnes and Noble, you're just one of, massive, faceless, nameless customers, right? What else, right? What are the other activities here? Let's go into differentiation, right? Who are her buyers?
Maybe they were selling like first editions or something? Like
Yeah, they were doing like mainly children's books.
Local.
Right. Local authors, right? Local books. Like we're just trying to this little thing. You're not going to get. And by the way, even now, the Upper West Side still sort of this like cultural value of like we reject the big box stores because we have these niche stores that offer unique products that you can't find anywhere else. Say again? Yeah, that's the goal. That's the goal, right? Why are they buying your product? Why are people buying it from Shop Around the Corner and not from Barnes and Nobles or Fox Books, as it was called in the movie? Why? Because they were taken care of in there. Oh, Mrs. Jones, it's so nice to see you again. I found this new book just came in. You might love to see it. Right? Say again?
It's a personal feeling.
It's the personal feeling, right? How can you uniquely help the buyer, right? So she's she's enhancing the buyer's experience, right?
Connecting.
And then what's the cost of differentiation? Charge a premium price, right? So the only way that a store like that survives is by charging more. Period.
Well, I guess also because they're not winning on the flip side
Correct.
in terms of volume
Correct.
discounts. When
Correct.
they buy a book, they spend a lot on it.
Correct.
So they have to charge
Correct.
more to survive.
Correct. So here you are. You're trying to achieve focused differentiation, and is it enough? Does her bookstore survive?
No.
No. In the movie, no. In the real world, yeah, sure. As long as there's enough people out there who value your service, you're going to survive as a niche player. If there aren't enough people, if you're a bookstore that's going to say we're going to sell the same stuff at Barnes and Noble does, but we're just going to be the neighborhood store, you're not going to survive, right? Her strategy was saying we're also going to read stories to you, we're going to get to know you individually, and even then it wasn't to survive. But that's kind of good Hollywoodism as much as is understanding how businesses work.
The movie was in 1998.
It's a good movie.
Do you guys still know it?
You should
It was really big.
That's
It was big. It was big. It's big also because it was locally filmed, right? So there's so much of the movie. Like for me, it's in my neighborhood, right? So I know that this scene was filmed in Riverside Drive, 2 blocks from my apartment. So every time I have guests, like, hey, check this out, right? And then you go to Cafe Lalo on whatever scene, oh, that scene from You've Got Mail. Like for several years after the movie came out, they had like a poster of the movie, with a picture from their scene, and it's still there, right? So I haven't been there.
Can you imagine how I should go in Williamsburg with all the shots, right? I'll watch every movie.
Finally, just a footnote, don't forget the system. Remember Michael Porter was saying, right? It's not just about individual activities, but it's about having a whole system of activities that could be tied together. Right? Think about what Vanguard did in his article. Think about what Trader Joe's did in terms of what we've talked about. Right? It's not just having a couple of things that are different. It really has to be an entire system that forces trade-offs, and that fit in your system has to really lock out imitators. Right? In the movie, Meg Ryan's character, after her store goes out of business, she walks into the Barnes & Nobles, and she sees that they also have a children's book reading alley. Okay, great. So I guess she wasn't really adding that much, right? And she kind of comes to terms with that, and she's sad about it. But, the reality is there really wasn't that much that she was offering that the other stores, that the big box store wasn't. Now, if one were to think about it from more an arithmetic standpoint, right? If you're going to get 90% likelihood of success from just copying somebody's activity, right? If you had 10 different activities that copied them, and each one of them had 90% success, right? Then the overall likelihood of success would be only 35%. 90 times 9 times 9 times 9 times 9, right? So it's just kind of an arithmetic way of making the same thing. So let's come back to differentiation, right? And we've talked about the sort of core chart about here's an average company and here's what a premium company does. If you look at a premium company, what does it mean to really unpack that uniqueness? It really means, right, first of all, for a typical company, right, here are their costs that they need to meet the sort of the average needs, and here are the average prices, and here's their average profit, right? For a company like Apple, for a company like like Husky, what they're doing is they have additional costs that are involved in differentiating, and there's additional prices, right? A price premium that's gained, and specifically that price premium is designed to pull back the differentiation. So you have to understand what those activities are that are above and beyond the typical company's activities. So, what is Husky's business model? On the value creation side, what do? They're looking at they have narrow customer scope, right? They're not looking at all companies. They're looking at ones that are doing medium tonnage PET, and thin wall, high performance reliability, right? They're not looking at companies that are not trying to do them, right? They're really moving on the science side as opposed to just purely, kind of a craft, if you will, and superior service. Like they really, how do they invest in their customer service side and their sales force to really deliver?
Great loyalty.
The loyalty, exactly. On the delivery side, right, we have economies of scope across their businesses, right? Because it's not just a single product, but we can deliver a certain mix of products to you, right? Agglomeration economies. Agglomeration has to do with geography. Right? So they physically put themselves near where their customers are. And then all of a sudden, if you make your machines right next to where the bottlers are, then you don't have to worry about transportation costs in between. So now that requires safety, requires commitment on both sides, but those are economies to be gained. Internal sales force and job rotation. Right? All those are different ways they can deliver volume, high-powered incentives, outsourced component manufacturing. That last piece, what does that mean? Outsourced component manufacturing. What was typically done at what it Husky did for its componentry? Think of their supply chain. There's stuff that they bought and there's stuff that they made. Right? A lot of the stuff they
What
bought.
they could do is they could say, well, we just want to do the finishing product of compiling everything together.
Right. They did not, a lot of these companies made their own, did a lot more of making their equipment. Husky really assembled the machines, and their position really was taken from machine design and from service, much more so than building the individual, nuts and bolts and wires and screws that might have gone in. And of course, I say that without knowing a whole lot about nuts and bolts and wires and screws. The final question is, how do they capture value? How do you capture value in general? You have to set a price that people are willing to pay that's going to cover the costs that they have from having this particular business model. And in a sense, by the way, this trumps everything else. Because if you have a high enough price and no one else is doing what you're doing, you're going to make a profit. It may not be sustainable, but you're going to make a profit. So the key thing really before you do anything else is how much are customers willing to pay for your product? So, what are the differentiation activities? Before we actually get into that, a couple of disclaimers. Number one, we have to remember, differentiation activities must be ones that cause customers to be willing to pay a premium. They can't just be things you do to be different, right? The things you're doing to be different in a way that says that's for which customers are going to appreciate, and they're going to say, I like this, I'm going to pay more for it. I'm not just doing it because I'm trying to be special. Number one. Number two, the cost savings, of course, by the way, are permitted, right? This is what you were talking about before. Why can't you be both a cost saver and a differentiator? You can be. And you certainly are, can gain cost savings, but if you structure your entire organization around it, you're not going to be structuring your entire organization on
You're
differentiation.
saying
You're allowed to be lower
you can
cost.
be both. No, but you're gonna structure. You can be low cost, but focus on the differentiating strategy, but not focus on both. Otherwise,
Correct. So even imagine a massive low-cost retailer, they do still have a store brand, right? Maybe people want to pay a little extra for store brand, product, right? So you're allowed to do these kinds of things. So agglomeration economies are what we talked about before. So some common pitfalls in differentiation, industry forces. Here are things you could do wrong if you're differentiating. What can you do wrong? Ignore the buyer.
That's the whole premise of it.
That's the whole premise. You're trying to do something special for the buyer. If you're doing something special without caring what the buyer actually wants, right? So what?
It's the market.
Right? So what? Do enough buyers actually value what you're trying to do? Right? You're creating a niche for something nobody actually cares about. Gratuitous services, I'll talk about that on the next slide. Right? Charging an excessive premium. Right? It's not going to work. Ignoring market segments, current or emerging. Right? The fact is, if you try to service a buyer that doesn't exist, you're not going to get very far. Ignoring the competitors. Right? If you don't have a barrier to imitation,
Well, this
if
is
you don't ignore your cost position.
quarters fast also.
It is.
Got to make sure that
You are exactly right. You are exactly right. And the third was ignoring the cost. And in fact, I was going to say, where did this come from? And this, by the way, comes back to your write-ups. You can come up with a long list of pontificating things, right? Which I did here. And then I said, wait a second. This isn't listed. I wrote this list about 6 different times. Because every time I wrote it, I said, wait a second, what am I missing? What am I not getting? And as I wrote it, I said, wait a second, I'm really just paying attention to industry forces, right? Ignoring the buyer, here's that side of it. Ignoring the competitor substitute entrance, that's this side of it. Ignoring the cost, that's really what suppliers are involved.
Yep.
So if you're not paying attention to the industry structure in which you're sitting, right, you're not going to have success in differentiation. So excellent, excellent. This was what I want to come back to before, right, when I said gratuitous services, right? So they're now developing the software that will let you text message your voice to somebody else, and it doesn't even convert it to text, it's just a recording, right? And the recipient will be able to hear it in real time and reply back to you with a real-time message of your voice immediately.
Why?
No, but this is already not new.
This was done
What's that called?
This was done like 2001.
Voicemail.
Get a little earlier.
What's
not
that
real
text?
You're off by about 100 years.
Phone call?
Telephone.
Hi, would you be able to pick up milk today? Yes, honey, I can.
It's a telephone.
Great. It's a telephone, right? So here I am thinking of, it's a joke, right? So I hope you didn't catch the joke, but now you did.
No, it's a
Developing a software that lets you get your voice to somebody else. It doesn't even convert it to text first. Wow, we've been spending all this time with text messaging. We've been able to shortcut
Put my
around
money in
that.
Pestex.
Say again?
Put my money in Pestex.
You put your money in plastics?
Pestex.
Oh, Pestex, yeah, right? And then the recipient can hear it right away, and then they can reply back right away. In real time, we don't have to worry about this messaging thing. So if you don't pay attention to what your buyer needs, you run the risk of creating the software, which in fact is actually totally useless because it's just replicating a telephone.
It's not entirely true
Okay.
because people have moved away from traditional methods of communication. Mostly, you don't call somebody to just tell them something. You send them a text message.
Right.
But when the text message becomes too long, it's easier to just say it.
Right.
The benefit is you don't get anyone interrupting you, arguing with you. Just say it, and they've got the message.
Right, so but now we have this opportunity, real-time technology, where the person can hear me in real time, right? So, have I really accomplished anything? Because I haven't been paying attention to what the buyer needs.
So that's instant. It's not like WhatsApp, right?
I'm describing a phone.
This is just a telephone.
I'm just describing a telephone here. I'm not describing a technology.
Right, telephone.
Alexander Graham.
Right. They said they had this since 2001. Right. When I said you were off by 100 years, I wasn't kidding. Okay, so we talked about pitfalls in the premium industry, right? And now, how would we, what are the kinds of pitfalls we would have on the cost focus side? I left the slide blank, because I want us to come up with it. Right, tell me, right? What are the pitfalls that we had in premium? We had ignoring the buyer, ignoring the competitors, ignoring the costs, right? What would you see over here?
I mean, I wonder if you go the whole wrong route.
Okay.
You may decide that you're trying to be a cost leader. You try and keep your costs down so low, and then you pass on all the savings to your customers.
Okay, so how would that look like here?